Hey guys, today we're talking about non-renewable energy. Sorry for my scribbled handwriting. My title page got messed up, so there you go. Now we know what notes we're doing today. So we're going to begin with the generation of electricity from these non-renewable sources. So in a moment we're going to talk about the different types of non-renewable resources, mostly your main fossil fuels like coal, oil, and gas. So to show you how electricity is generated, we'll start off with a coal-burning power plant. And so what we see happening here is we see just raw coal just entering the power plant. To begin with, we're going to burn that coal. We're going to do the combustion process. And that then is going to send the combustion, the heat, into what we call a boiler. And we want to kind of look over here is we want to see that we have incoming water. In a lot of power plants, what we want to do is we have water coming in. We want to use heat to change water into steam. So we end up using water, heated water, steam, as our workhorse in a lot of different types of power plants. We'll see the same thing in nuclear as well. So anyways, you have to have something combustible. Here we have coal. You go through the combustion process, you heat it up, you're going to warm up the water into steam. Then steam has a bunch of energy to it, so we pump steam with some pressure behind it into a turbine. The steam is going to turn the turbine, which is like a wheel-like structure. Here you can see what a large turbine would actually look like. That turbine is then given kinetic energy, the energy of motion. That kinetic energy then is sent over here to this generator, an electrical generator, and the generator changes that kinetic energy from the turbine into electrical energy. So then the generator sends the electrical energy into your power lines, into these transmission lines here. Oh, and by the way, this is what a generator actually looks like. And then electricity is sent to an electrical grid, and then it will be sent to your house or your business or your school or wherever. So yeah, that's the basic inner workings of a coal-burning power plant. And just notice, again, the water's coming in, and then you have your heated water that you use to generate steam to turn the turbine. That usually moves back out of the power plant to a cooling tower or to some other body of water. Okay, so this just sums up what we just talked about. It says you're going to burn fuel from the coal, and that's going to transfer energy to water, which becomes steam. The steam then has kinetic energy, and that is transferred to the blades of a turbine. It's going to turn the turbine. It's kind of like a fan. And then as the energy in the steam turns the turbine, the shaft in the center of the turbine turns the generator, and you change that mechanical or kinetic energy into electrical energy. Okay, it says this electricity is then transported along a network of connected transmission lines, also known as an electrical grid, which connects the power plant with the users, like us at our houses. And once on the grid, that electricity is distributed to homes and businesses, factories, schools. We can use it as heat energy for cooking. We can use it as light energy in our lights. We use that energy to operate electronic devices. Again, thinking of all the electrical things that you use in your house. There you go. Okay, so this next slide is really important because it's going to show all the transitions that we go through from the very beginning, from extracting the resource to turning it into electricity to actually using it in the home. Now, our laws of thermodynamics come into play with this as well. We're going to talk about something called net energy here in a few minutes. When we think about what type of energy we should be using, we need to think about the net amount that we're going to get. And so what we mean by that, how much energy do we use in all of these many processes before the electricity actually arrives in our home. And a lot of times once you add all these things up, your net energy is actually very low. Okay, so again, originally you have to deal with the energy source that we are going to begin with, so either your coal, oil, or natural gas if we're talking about these non-renewable sources. You have to extract it from the ground, which requires a lot of energy, and again here you're losing that waste heat energy to the environment, which is your second law of thermodynamics. So you're always losing that waste heat energy to the environment. Then you have to transport it. Again, you're losing energy. Then you have to process it, again losing energy. Then you have to go through the combustion process, which you lose energy there. Then we have to generate the electricity using the generator, losing energy there. Transporting and disposing of waste. The actual transmission of the electricity along the electrical lines, we lose a little bit of waste heat energy there. And then finally it arrives to you. So again, we have to think of all of those steps and all the energy that's lost along the way when we're calculating the net energy. Okay, so fossil fuels are what we would call primary sources of energy, and then your electricity that we generate from those are considered a secondary source. So it says, therefore, electricity is an energy carrier, something that can move and deliver energy in a convenient, usable form. Okay, energy efficiency, we just touched on this when I looked at that other diagram that showed the movement from place to place. And so when we think about a typical coal-burning power plant, it's usually only about 35% efficient. Okay, so not very efficient. A way that we could make a power plant more efficient is to do this thing that's called cogeneration. And so it says in cogeneration, you're using a fuel to generate electricity and then also to produce heat. So you're using that same initial source for two different goals. So a good example would be if you're using steam for an industrial purpose in a factory or a power plant, or even you're using that steam as a method to heat your building, you could actually send it through a turbine first to turn the blades of a turbine to hook it up to a generator to generate electricity, and then you can send it to heat the building or for whatever purpose you're using in that factory. It says that here you can move the efficiency from 35% all the way up to 90%. Okay, so now on to a little bit more with non-renewable resources. Okay, so as we know, or as you guys, I'm sure you probably already know, pretty much all the main energy sources that we use on the planet today do come from fossil fuels. Coal, oil, natural gas. You're going to hear me talking about those a lot today. These are non-renewable or finite in nature. We've talked about what these terms mean. The amount that we have right now is the amount that we'll always have. We will not get more of these fossil fuels. We have become deeply dependent on this cheap energy source. We do not charge very much money for it. Again, pretty much any type of machinery you can think of runs off of these fossil fuels. So here it says energy facilities typically operate for 30 to 50 years, so it's not possible to change the energy technologies to renewable overnight. You know, our next set of notes is going to be on renewable energy, and you just hear all these politicians talking about renewable, renewable, renewable. Again, everything is kind of stuck on these fossil fuels, so to change, it's going to take a while. And then also it says if we went ahead and we were like, okay, let's, just cold turkey, let's change over right now to all renewable stuff, which we wouldn't be able to do anyways. But if we did, it would end up costing more to do that. So it says retiring them right away to replace it with something better would be very, very costly. So it's going to be a little bit of a process where we are going to have a transition period where we're moving from the types of fossil fuels we're using now to other sources of energy. But one thing is for certain, and we're going to talk about oil. Oil we will see most likely run out during our lifetimes. So we are going to have to get off the oil, at least the fossil fuel version of oil. Okay, so more on non-renewable resources. Again, this is just kind of a repeat of what we just talked about. Now, it doesn't have to be coal, oil, and gas. They could be minerals like gold, copper. They're things that take a long period of time to form. And so, in a few moments, we'll talk about how our main fossil fuels on this planet formed. One thing we need to remember, too, we talked about this at the beginning of the year, is that almost all energy on Earth initially comes from the sun. And that's because these fossil fuels were once living plants and animals that died, became covered up, they became decomposed, and through heat and pressure they turned into the different types of fuels that we have today. So again, here we have oil, coal, and natural gas. Those are the big guys. It says the oil is the economy's largest energy source. It supplies us with 37% of our energy. Coal is the second with 25%, and natural gas is the third with 23%. So we can say collectively fossil fuels power 80% of the world's economy. One other non-renewable resource that I have not mentioned yet today is uranium. Uranium is what we use for nuclear power, which will be another set of notes we'll have this unit, but we only use them at a small percent, at about 6%. Okay, so that comes out to 86%. So the remaining about 15% is going to come from those renewable resources you've heard me mention. That's your next set of notes. So we have biomass, makes up about 3%. Hydroelectric is using water to create energy. Solar, wind, wave power, geothermal are another 2%. Okay, so this is a picture that shows you different layers of rocks on Earth and where we would see certain types of fossil fuels form. So we just said that fossil fuels are formed from prehistoric plants and animals. They lived hundreds of millions of years ago. So again, they formed a long, long time ago. This was like a certain event at a certain time of geologic history. As far as I've read and researched, like, this is it. You know, we are not going to get more of these particular types of fossil fuels. So these dead things, they became buried under these multiple layers of rock, as you can see here. They went through decomposition. They went through a lot of heat and pressure. And then you've got these stratified layers of rock. You've got all this porous rock that this oil and gas, the leftovers from the decomposition, they were able to seep up through these different layers of rock, and then they were capped underneath of these non-porous layers of rocks. These are what we call cap rocks. And pretty much wherever you see these little oil reserves, you're going to see these pockets of gas above them. Okay, so you've got your oil below, and then you've got your little pockets of gas above, so you get oil and natural gas together. So that's how you get those two fossil fuels. You get coal in the same type way, except for coal is usually the dead remains of like trees and ferns and plants, whereas these gas and oil deposits are the dead remains of like buried ocean creatures, usually little teeny tiny microscopic things like little phytoplankton, little algae that died and were decomposed in the ocean and became covered up, and heat and pressure turned them into these. Okay, so just a little backstory there. And then here, you're going to see this same diagram over and over again throughout the notes. It just kind of shows you how we would go about getting these resources out of the ground. So we're actually going to start with, which one are we going to start with first? We're going to start with oil. Okay, so I'll just show you the oil ones on this picture. Okay, so here we have oil over here. So as far as drilling for oil, you can actually have floating platforms out in the ocean to do the offshore drilling. So that's what we see here. You can have drilling on land. So again, they have to drill through all these different layers until they get underneath of that cap rock, where you get the oil deposit and then the natural gas sitting on top of it. When we pump oil out, we can send it through pipelines if we find them on land. If we find oil in the water, we can send them on ships. And we've got a pretty extensive pipeline system in the country, so we can pipeline them, we can store it, or move it to where it needs to go. Over here, then, we have coal, and then over here we have geothermal. Geothermal we're not really going to talk about until next unit. But coal, we've already learned about how we can mine for that. You can have the subsurface mining. You can have strip mining, which happens above ground. Here's some more strip mining. Okay, so move on for now. This diagram is just showing us kilocalorie use per person per day during different time periods and in different types of countries. So here it's showing in a modern industrial country like the United States, we have a very high per capita energy usage. Okay, so 260,000 kilocalories. And this shows other developed nations might have more, like a little bit smaller than us. We are notorious for having one of the largest per capita energy uses of any country. And this just shows you, going back to the demographic transition stuff we talked about a couple of chapters ago, in early industrial it was much lower, in agricultural much lower, early agricultural, hunter-gatherer, primitive. So obviously the amount of energy every person uses on a day-to-day basis in a developed country like ours has skyrocketed. Okay, this graph shows us a breakdown of which types of energy we use most worldwide. So oil is the big winner here with 30% use, and then it looks like natural gas and coal are almost tied here for second. Your renewable piece of the pie makes up about 19% worldwide. Here again, nuclear power is just a small percentage of our total energy that we're getting from nuclear. So that's the world breakdown. So again, mostly non-renewable, just a little over 80%. And then if we look at just the U.S., whoa, we are obsessed with oil. We use a lot of oil, so 40% oil for us. Again, tied in second place for coal and natural gas. Our renewables, we're only using 9% in our country of renewables, and then nuclear power is at about 70%. So again, U.S., we're just obsessed with oil. And 91% non-renewables, so not very much renewable going on. Okay, some trends on our energy usage for the 20th century. Coal used to be huge, thinking of Industrial Revolution. That has decreased. We've moved away from coal, at least in our country, from 55% to 22%. Oil has increased drastically, so coal burning dirty, we were able to figure out oil. Oil is easy to transport, it's liquid, it's easy to store, so it's been really great for automobiles. So anyways, that's skyrocketed as well. Natural gas has increased big time, and nuclear has increased just slightly, and now we've just kind of see it plateau. We're not building new nuclear power plants, and some people think it's going to be phased out. Just people are so worried about the dangers of nuclear. Okay, this is a really cool graphic because it shows us what's going on with all of our different types of energy over time, and actually we get a nice projection for the future as well. So if we look kind of where we're at in here, they say that they think we've already reached the peak in oil for production. And we'll talk about how much oil is left. But again, oil is something that we will run out of. That is starting to go down. And what it looks like during our lifetime, I guess kind of the big replacement that could come in would be natural gas. Okay, so natural gas is looking pretty good. Again, coal we've already seen come down. It looks like coal is going to continue to go down. We know a lot of developing countries still use it, but they're eventually, as they become more and more industrialized, they're going to probably start getting rid of coal because it is so dirty and it releases so much sulfur. Yeah, so coal and oil going down. It looks like nuclear again, up, but then I think eventually it'll phase out. And then something that we might see in the distant future gaining in popularity would be hydrogen solar, which we'll talk about in your next set of notes. And then the only other thing to point out here is that we used to use wood. Wood was very popular, and then coal came in and replaced wood. Okay, so how do we know which energy source is best to use? There's a lot of things we need to take into consideration when we're considering what type of energy source to use. First of all, the availability. How much do we have left? Is it easy to extract? The net energy yield, that's huge. We'll talk about that again here in a moment. The cost is a big one. And then important for this course is the environmental impact. What sort of effort is it going to take to extract it from the ground? What kind of damage is it going to do to the land and the organisms that live in the ecosystem and the nearby waterways? So I've mentioned net energy a bunch of times. What are we talking about with net energy? It's the total amount of energy available from a given source minus the amount of energy used to get the energy to the consumer. Okay, so again, we went through that whole scenario, how you have to locate it, extract it or remove it, process it, transport it, get rid of the waste. All that goes into the net energy. And then we can create a ratio from that for comparison purpose, and that would just be your ratio of useful energy produced to the useful energy used to produce it. That shouldn't have useful in there, sorry. Okay, I think we're going to do one type of energy, and then I'm going to go ahead and divide these notes into two sections. So we'll talk about oil first, and then I'll stop to do a second video. So for oil, we can, sometimes you hear it called petroleum, petrol, crude oil. It says it's a thick liquid consisting of hundreds of combustible hydrocarbons and small concentrations of nitrogen, sulfur, and oxygen impurities. We already know how it's produced. It's produced from decomposition of dead little microorganisms in the ocean, like plankton, that were buried, went through heat and pressure, and formed these fossil fuels. Okay, so drilling for oil. It says oil and gas can be found in these permeable rock layers called reservoirs, and they can be tapped by drilling wells, which we've looked at some pictures of that earlier. These wells can be naturally pressurized, meaning that, you know, there's built up pressure, so you could just tap a hole into it and the oil would come flowing up on its own, or they can be pumped to the surface. And then here it says, or they can even be driven from below by injecting water, gas, steam, and chemicals. We're going to be looking at fracking during this unit, and that's a pretty cool kind of new age technology they're using, but it's very controversial. You have a lot of people saying that there's a lot of environmental issues with it, and you have some people saying that they think that it could, you know, give us, you know, however many years of oil that we would need. So here it says there's some very high-tech drilling exploration that's happening. We're able to drill more than 7 miles deep and even horizontally, and that would be like the fracking that I'm talking about. Okay, so this picture is going to show us how, if the oil well located below is not pressurized on its own, how we could inject steam down into those reservoirs and pump the oil out. So this shows what we would do. It says you would pump water under pressure into a well to force the heavy crude oil toward the well. Okay, so here's your well that we want to pump up. So here we are sending that steam water down into the reservoir. It says you're going to pump the oil and water mixture to the surface with your pump here. And you're going to retain the oil, and you can reuse that water over and over again, heat it up again, pump it back down. That steam is going to then push that oil up into the well, and again you can just recycle the water over and over again. So again, you would use this technique, injecting steam down here, to pump oil up if it's not pressurized on its own. Okay, so when we extract oil, you can actually make lots of different things from it. So that's what this is saying. It says after extraction, oil is transported via pipeline if on land. So if you're doing the drilling and the extraction of oil on land, you can send it through pipelines, which I've already said we have a pretty extensive pipeline system in this country, or a super tanker if it's on water and it needs to go to a refinery to be refined. And it says liquid petroleum is also called crude oil, which can be refined into lots of different products. And I have a list of even more products we can make on an upcoming slide. Here's some of them, though. We can make tar, asphalt, gasoline, diesel, kerosene. And these are separated out by the temperature at which they boil. So that's an important fact right there. Okay. And then here's some pictures just showing you how we can transport the oil that we've just pumped out to the refinery. Here's the pipeline system I was talking about. Here's your boat. Here's your trucks. Those are all different methods of transporting oil. Okay, and then here's another diagram showing you when we get that crude oil, we're going to heat it up, and based on the temperature that it boils at, we can make lots of different things. So we can make different types of gases. We can make gasoline that we're familiar with that you use to fuel your car. We can make aviation fuel, airplane fuel. We can make heating oil for homes and buildings. We can make diesel oil, again, another transportation oil. Naphtha. We can make grease and wax. We can make asphalt. Those are some other products that come from oil. And then here's even more. You can make certain chemicals that you use in industries. Some pesticides, plastics, believe it or not, are made from oil. So those come from fossil fuels. Synthetic fibers, paints, medicines, other fuels, paraffin wax, mineral oil, petroleum jelly, like the stuff that we use for the air pollution lab, that comes from oil. dyes, solvents, asphalt. We've already seen that one. Okay, so lots of different things that we get from oil. Okay, so here are your top petroleum producing countries in order of production. So here we have Saudi Arabia, Russia, us, the U.S. So we are third in producing. However, we import over half of the oil that we use. It's said that we mostly import from Canada and then secondly from Saudi Arabia. So that's interesting. And then we have Iran producing, China, Canada, and Mexico. So those are the top oil producing countries. And I've mentioned this a couple of times. How long do we think the oil is going to last? So with the reserves that we've identified, we think that oil will last at least 53 years with current usage rates. However, as we've talked about many times this year, we know that per capita use of things continues to increase, especially with an increasing population and an increasing standard of living, I guess you could say. So we could probably assume that this amount of time would actually be shorter. And then here it says known and projected supplies are likely to be 80% depleted within 42 to 93 years, depending on the usage rate. The U.S. oil supplies are expected to be depleted within 15 to 48 years, depending on our annual usage rate. So again, most likely during our lifetime, we're going to see a shift from oil to another fuel source. Okay, just a couple more things on oil before we move on to our next fossil fuel. We do have a controversy with oil. This is called the UNWAR controversy. UNWAR stands for Alaska Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. It says it has a known reserve of oil that has not yet been tapped. The problem is this area is a calving ground for caribou. It's a summering site for geese and swans, and it's home to polar bears, Arctic foxes, and wolves. So as you can imagine, you're probably going to have a lot of people on the environmental side that say, no, we should not be drilling for oil here. But then you've got quite a few Alaskans whose livelihoods, revolve around this sort of thing, so they want the drilling. So again, that's what this says here. It says opponents say extra traffic, destruction of habitat will scare these species away from this preserved land because it is a wildlife refuge. And proponents say that there would be little damage done to the ecosystem. And many Alaskans are in favor of drilling because they work on rigs, they receive royalties from oil, and then Floridians are closely watching this case, supposedly, because they may be facing some more drilling on their shores in the future as well. Okay, so here is UNWAR. And you can see the oil deposits right here. And here's some other high potential areas as well. Okay, and over here. Okay, and then another issue we have with oil are oil spills. I left a really important one off here. I left the BP one, but here we have one in the late 80s, the Exxon Valdez. Millions of gallons were released near Alaska. In 91, we have the Persian Gulf oil spill, and here what happened is the Iraqi army actually dumped huge volume of oil into the Persian Gulf on purpose to hurt other countries. And then here we have a pollution act. It says the Oil Pollution Act of 1990 allows the EPA to better regulate spills, oil storage facilities, and oil tankers. So that came about after this first spill. So again, I forgot the BP one. I believe it's of 2010 down in the Gulf. I know I put that in our water pollution notes. We'll come back and talk about that specifically in those notes. Okay, and then lastly, let's end with advantages and disadvantages with oil. Some advantages of oil is we'll have a supply for the next 42 to 93 years, supposedly. It is a low cost because the government does subsidize it. We have a high net energy yield with oil, easily transported, both within and between countries, and it doesn't use too much land to extract it. Disadvantages, we need to find a substitute. That's probably the biggest one because we're going to run out. It says that we use artificially low prices, so that encourages waste of oil and it discourages the search for alternatives. So that's a big one. A lot of people say what we should be doing is like do what Europe does, and they charge a lot of money per gallon of gasoline, and that is supposed to help encourage people to use other types of transportation besides private cars. Obviously generates air pollution when burned. It releases CO2. There's moderate water pollution during the whole process of getting the oil. And then we have a big potential for spills, obviously. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and stop these notes for now, and then I'll do a part 2.